Good. Salute the sun. No.
So that's what I'd be rejecting, but this did fall, didn't it? Yeah, the p-value, 0.23, so it was there, wasn't it? I know, right, first time. No, wasn't it? What would be the z-score of the 5th percentile? I don't know what it is, fine. What is z-score of the 5th percentile? Maybe 1.645. Think about that. What we're saying is if we want to reject the lowest 5%, we want to reject anything that has a z-score lower than negative 1.645. And so when we did this problem over there, we got a z-score of negative 2.83. It's definitely over there in the values that I'm rejecting. You can reference that rejection region. That's what it's talking about in the notes. That rejection region is anything to the left of negative 1.645. Why? Because that's the z-score of the 5th percentile. Anything to the left of that has a less than 5% chance of happening. So when we found our z-score of that 80% free throw shooter being negative 2.83, we know that's less than what we said, so we will be rejected. Test statistic is what we just found over here. You saw me do it on the last problem. It's right here. It's what we actually observed. We saw him shoot 64%, minus the mean that we're assuming is true, divided by the standard deviation of that p-hat distribution. When would it be a t?
Not no. You're at 30.
And we were calculating x. Please make sure that you're using, see those P sub O's? They're putting that P sub O there to say, this is the P, the population from the null hypothesis. Because we're always assuming, we're always treating the null like it's true, and then figuring out how likely it is that we would see what we observed in the sample if the null is true.
So that's
That's
just
what
the
I-
same thing as P and Q, basically.
Yeah. You asked earlier if you could use P, and I said, yeah, you can, but it gets confusing. You can kind of start to see why there's so many P's in there. I like to set it as pi, but do whatever you want. You can call it P sub O. It's the population portion from the north. That's all the work we've already done.
With these numbers up here at the top for like P hat and P the same as the population.
The numbers for P hat and B, yes.
How is the test gonna look like on this?
Hmm?
It's just, how is the test on this gonna look like? It's just basically two ways of solving it.
You have two ways.
Because you're either doing it for P hat or X one.
The only other thing you'll have to learn is that it's two-tailed. So if you remember, I think yesterday we kinda got into, I could guess it being less than, or could guess of it being greater than, or I could just say, I know it's just not what you said the null is. So check both correct. So that's it. I mean, if you get this, you'll get X bar. Because this is kind of just, approaching what you're doing in the reverse direction that a confidence interval is. It's not really that different, you just kinda go in the reverse direction. So if you understood confidence intervals, it's not new. All this is right over there, so let me go ahead and move on, because I already wrote all that, do it over there. And so then state, and make sure you know that script. And that script, back when I gave you all those things to start studying for the AP exam, all those scripts are on there, this one's on there. That's not enough. What I'd want you to say is I'd want you to reference what the p-value was. So since our p-value was 0.0023, which is less than 5%, we have sufficient evidence to reject the null. Don't just say we reject it. Always say what you found.
What do you mean? We would say that, we found that in our sample.
You don't even say that, you can just say the p-value, right? The probability of finding that sample if the null is true is 0.0023%, which is less than alpha, so we have sufficient evidence to reject the null. And anytime you reject the null, you conclude the alternative. You either fail to reject the null and just say we don't have enough evidence to say that this is false, or you reject the null, say it's false, and conclude the alternative. John?
So is this the same thing that's on the back of that? Is that something else on the back of the like?
Maybe, I have no idea.
Okay.
Let's see. Back of you.
Yep.
When you're talking about like the scripts that you gave us, were those like the flashcards?
No, somewhere in there it says interpretations. Maybe like the second page is 2 staple pages.
Okay.
And it's just got how to interpret everything we've learned. Standard deviation all the way down to conclusions in a hypothesis test. I don't know that I want to take the time to go through this. Let's see. Yeah, this is the way I already did it, but the difference being here is just that on that last what method, in the last method we set a rejection region before we found a p-value. So in this method we said, okay, if it's less than 5%, it's got to be smaller than a z-score of negative 1.645. Everybody see that? And so then we go find the z-score of that p hat. And so we get that it's negative 2.83, and so we go, okay, yes, negative 2.83 is less than that number, and I know that number is the 5th percentile, so if it's even smaller, it's less than 5%, I can reject it. The other method would be the way we did it, when I did it just at the front of the board, which would be, we find the z-score first, and then figure out its p-value and reference the p-value. You can either go ahead and figure out what the z-score of the 5th percentile would be, or you can find the p-value and then check and see if it's less than the alpha. There's no need to write all that. So jump and find that place in the notes. And I said this the first test. In the end, you can't be certain you're correct. You can't be certain. You can be confident. You can be very confident, but you can't be certain. So in this scenario with this free throw shooter, either the null is true, and we just happen to collect a random sample that would occur only 0.23% of the time by random chance. And that'd be the free throw shooter's argument. No. You just happen to come in here on my one bad day. Or the more likely probability is that the null is wrong, and the sample is giving evidence that the true population proportion is different than what he said, different than the null. It's not 80%. If you want to know how to do this on the calculator, it's on page 555. I'm not going to show you. It's on 555. I'm not going to show you so we can keep going. If you want to write right there where it says the calculator will run this test if the conditions are clearly violated. You can also have to pick the correct test from the list. It's page 555 if you want to know how to do it on the calculator. I'm not going to show you because I don't think you should. If you're doing it on the calculator, you might not show all your work. But you feel free to use it if you want to. Page 555. All of that's on the back of the sheet I gave you, that cheat sheet that talked about. Right here, this one. So, all this right here is just on the back of that. It's just your state plan do conclude for hypothesis test. Most people forget this part and then end up losing some points. It'd be like over here if I just said pi is equal to 0.8 and pi is less than 0.8, and then I never told what pi was. Make sure you're telling what pi is. Call it by its proper name. What are we doing here? And what's the chapter?
Significance test.
Significance test, right? Significance test. And on this one, what were we doing a significance test for?
Hypothesis.
P, right? And if I'm using P, what critical value am I using?
Z-score.
Z-scores, right? Z-scores. So we're doing a significance test to predict P. That's how you get there if you want to fill in those blanks, where I told you just to write page 555. Go back and so on that single sheet you've got, I want you to go ahead and make sure you've got the name. We call it by its proper name. What we just did is a one sample, because you took one sample, Z test. Make sure you state that's what you're going to do. So in your plan, after you set the hypotheses, set the significance level, define your parameter, then say what you're going to do. There we're doing a one sample Z test. one sample z-test. Anytime you're doing a one sample z-test, would be for the, and then whatever pi is in context, for the population proportion of whatever. On that last, there's like three throws. That's on the back of that sheet. One sample z-test. You're taking one sample, and you're using z to test whether or not it's good evidence. Why don't you try and fill in the blanks? See if you can run the whole test, all you gotta do is fill in the blanks. Read the example, try and do it. Better to be last. You still got an example up on the board of what the whole test looks like. there is a blank in the state portion. The state portion doesn't have the null and the alternative hypothesis. Make sure you got those filled in.
Wait, so, for the second one, where you determine if you be more or less than, is that just like, is there a way to determine that, or do you just choose?
Depending on the problem, Andy. So the problem here on shows like American Idol contestants often wonder if there's an advantage to performing last. If there's no advantage to performing less and there were 12 people, you just have a 1 out of 12 chance, right? But if there was an advantage to it, you would have a better than 1 out of 12 chance. So we're testing to see. You're telling me it has no advantage to go last, so I just got a 1 out of 12 chance. And I'm saying, no, I think it's better than that, so I'm testing above.
Okay.
But on the free throw shooter, I tested below. Why? I didn't think he was an 80% free throw shooter. I thought he was less.
What if you thought opposite? You would just test it out?
Yeah, just test the other way.
So you can decide.
Yeah, depending on the problem.
Wait.
But I would think they're always gonna lead you to a question where it's obvious which side you're gonna test.
So if they like say that, if this, sample proportion is greater than the null hypothesis, then you should, does it matter if you were like to say, even though, the sample proportion was higher, you would put less than, would that like count against you?
Well, you've gotta set this before you ever take a sample proportion.
Okay. Wait, don't you have to like look at the, do you have to do 59 divided by 600 before you decide if it's greater than or less than?
No, sir.
Okay.
Because technically that's cheating.
But would you do that in your?
I hear you.
Yeah.
Technically that's cheating. So you gotta come up with your hypothesis before you ever run a study.
Okay.
Because if you come up with a hypothesis after the study, then you
Oh.
don't go testing anymore.
That's true.
It'd be like you going, hey, Mr. Kessler, somebody's outside in the hall. You think it's a guy or a girl? I'm not doing it. I think it's a guy. Now let's test.
Now let's test. If there's 2 people.
Not a test I want to run.
You're gonna trigger somebody.
There's the plan.
It's funny, Jonah. You're retarded.
What if you didn't use?
If you didn't put the what?
So zero.
That's fine to me.
I put, what do you put he had?
The hat's wrong. Because what do you have to assume the whole time?
That the null is true.
That the knowledge is true. If you put p hat, you're making a distribution where your sample is true. And we're not thinking our sample's true. We're having to say like, okay, I'll go along with what you're saying. I'll go along with your null being true, and let's see if it really is true, how likely this is that I'm about to see would occur.
Why are you using 1 out of 12 and not your sample? Because wouldn't you be proving that your sample's wrong?
No, because this whole thing right here, right? This is the free throw shooter, correct?
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out what's the probability that I see what I saw if the null is true. Think about what you said. If I'm saying what's the probability I see what I saw when what I saw was true, it's 100% every time, right? Like, okay, you get what I'm saying? Please remember, anytime you're doing one of these, make sure you're drawing out that density curve.
Oh, no, wait, three.
make sure you can interpret. If you want to self-assess where you're at right now in this class, you need to be able to interpret that value. That value right there, what's it mean? Here's what it means. The probability that I would see 59 out of 600 or more extreme. When the true probability of them picking the last is 0.83, probability of that happening would be 0.0918. Probability of this happening, if this is true, is that. So if people really don't have a preference about who goes last, the probability that 59 out of 600 would choose the last video is about 9.18%. What did we set alpha at the beginning? 5%, so that's bigger than 5%.
Where are you getting the 100 from on normal CDF?
The 100 from on the normal CDF. Oh, so first of all, this is missing part of it. It should go 1.33. That's that z-score right there, right? You understand the z-score being
Yeah,
1.33? And then just some big number. Because when you do normal CDF,
Oh,
it's
you're
lower
right.
bound,
Yeah,
upper
you're right.
bound. So if those are z-scores, 100 is plenty big enough, because there'd be 100 standard deviations to the right. So check shading 100 standard deviations. And then you'd need the mean. Mean was, if it's z-scores, it means 0. Standard deviation's 1, and I gotta make sure I labeled all that if you want full credit. So lower bound, upper bound, mean, standard deviation. If it's me, I might would find that without making it z-scores and just go 0.098 to 10, because 10 in percentage is a lot of percent. 0.083, and then standard deviation, whatever that is. And that'd give you the same answer. So you could either use the Z statistic or just normal CDF with the actual values, and they're both gonna give you that 0.0918. And so you should know where we're going with that. That p-value is higher than alpha. Yeah.
Can you explain how you know to set up the z-score like that, where you say z is greater than 1.33?
Why is that? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm just confused, like the formatting, I guess.
Would this have made sense to you if I said this? The probability that if I wrote that with you, then like, okay, that makes sense. Same thing.
Okay.
I'm just finding the z-score of that, right? What's the z-score of 0.098 from that distribution? Right, 1.3. And so that's all that is. Please make sure that in your conclusion you don't say, so we can conclude that the probability of being picked when you perform last is 1 out of 12. Don't agree with the null. You'll never say, okay, so the null is true. You're always going to end with, we don't have enough evidence to reject the null. Not guilty.